Hi everyone. Thank you for coming to this lunch and learn about our newest nutrition guide. This guide was produced with a nutrition team and Lipodystrophy United. So it's specifically made for lipodystrophy patients. And we have Annabella from Dr. Oral's team. She's a registered dietitian, and she will try and explain a little bit about the nutritional guide, and we will have some questions and answers. Thank you so much, Annabella, for coming and doing this. And go ahead.
Thank you so much for having me, Sharon, and everybody. Hello. I'm glad to be here. So yeah, we'll go over a little bit of some nutrition ideas for lipodystrophy. And of course, you are all the experts on lipodystrophy. Um, so take everything with your own experience, kind of. Um, so we all know what lipodystrophy is. We all know that it affects people differently. It can cause some hyperphagia, so some people feel that feeling of needing to eat all the time because of their hormone levels. And we're going to talk a little bit about how this affects our nutrition, how lipodystrophy affects our nutrition, and how we can make choices to make our experience with lipodystrophy easier. All right, and keep in mind that nutrition and diet is not a cure for lipodystrophy. But it should be part of your plan in managing your lipodystrophy symptoms. So, don't go off your meds or anything and just think that you can treat lipodystrophy with diet alone, because that can be dangerous. All right, so let's move on here. So, why is our blood glucose important in lipodystrophy? Um, Many people with lipodystrophy monitor their blood glucose because a lot of people with lipodystrophy have insulin resistance, as you probably know. And we can talk a little bit about what insulin does and how it affects our blood sugar. But food really affects our blood sugar. Glucose is one of our main sources of fuel for energy, especially for our brain and everything. So we need glucose to survive. And it mostly comes from carbohydrates, which we'll talk about in a bit. But the way that glucose gets into our cells is through a hormone called insulin. So when we eat food, our enzymes in our saliva start breaking them down into smaller pieces, and then it goes through our GI tract, and we start absorbing them into our blood. Those molecules, like glucose, go into our liver, and then they get transported to our cells wherever we need energy and everything. So the way that the glucose enters the cells is with the hormone called insulin. It's gonna kind of unlock the cell and let glucose into the cell. If we are insulin resistant, that means that our cells don't respond to insulin very well. And that means that the glucose is going to continue circulating in our blood, and it won't be able to get into our cells as well. So our cells technically are metabolically still starving. They don't have that fuel, but our blood is overloaded with glucose, and that's when, your provider can treat you with insulin and other types of medications. Okay, so I mentioned carbohydrates. So carbohydrates are the primary source of glucose in our diet. And these are things like starchy foods like rice, potatoes, um, veggies that are starchy, carrots, for example. Milk and yogurt are foods that have carbohydrates, oatmeal, products made from wheat like bread and pasta. These are all included in the realm of carbohydrates. So, in order to kind of keep our carbohydrate intake low, which is really going to be the best way to manage a lot of these symptoms, um, is going to be to keep our carbohydrate portion small. So, following a low carb diet. And many people with lipodystrophy already follow a low carbohydrate diet, as well as eating those foods with fiber and protein is going to slow down the digestion of carbohydrates. So we're not going to get a big glucose spike that leaves us feeling tired afterwards and everything. So foods with fiber and everything, whole grains, legumes like beans and lentils, and protein. Um, those things help us slow down our glucose absorption. Also, it's important to limit refined carbs like sweets, candy, pastries, sugar sweetened beverages, and things like white rice and white uh, wheat pasta, for example, and bread. Those refined carbs, we're going to absorb those really quickly. Also, we have some evidence that eating foods in a specific order can help decrease our absorption of glucose. And to do that, we want to try to eat our non-starchy veggies first, like salads, and then protein, like our cuts of meat, beans, and legumes. And then eating our starchy vegetables can help us lower that glucose spike. Okay, so let's talk about triglycerides. A lot of us know triglycerides as the lab value that we get at the doctor, which can be elevated in lipodystrophy. Triglycerides are a type of fat, so we'll have another page on this where I'll show you what a triglyceride looks like. But it is used for energy storage, hormone production, a lot of other things. However, with people with lipodystrophy, since adipose tissue is not developed or distributed properly, this can affect our storage capacity for the triglycerides that we ingest. And if we can't store those properly, then the triglycerides build up in our blood. This can increase our risk of pancreatitis, heart disease, fatty liver disease, because those fats kind of build up on those organs instead. This can also lead to insulin resistance because the adipose tissue, the fat, is blocking those cells so the insulin can't reach them. So where do we get triglycerides from? Mostly from the fat in our foods, but also we can make them out of the sugars that we eat. That's why it's important to have a low carb diet. Um, we can make those triglycerides out of sugars and fats, and foods high in fat are going to be things like animal protein that are have a lot of fat, red meat, oily fish, full fat dairy, nuts, seeds, avocados, olives, coconuts, cooking oils are also fats. And then we already talked about the importance of limiting those refined sugars, which is also going to help us kind of decrease our triglyceride levels. Of course, it's important to still include fat in our diet because it's important for so many things, hormone functioning, insulation, but we're going to want to really manage it well. Another important thing is to limit our intake of highly processed foods. These foods typically contain a lot of refined sugars, added sugars, a lot of sodium, and they may have harmful fats and other additives, which we might not want. They are very high in sodium, so especially if you have hypertension and you're watching your sodium levels, limiting those processed foods is going to be really important. As well as eating out. It's important to have fun and eat out once in a while, but make sure you're making choices and asking restaurant staff what are the best options for low sodium. Moving on to medications. Most people with lipodystrophy are going to be on some sort of medication and oftentimes diabetes medications. These are for insulin resistance, and it's important if you're on insulin, for example, to have a consistent amount of carbohydrates at your meals. So not having a meal that is like, huge in carbs and then your next meal is very low because you're going to really have to be monitoring those insulin levels, making sure you're getting enough insulin, so it's just easier for you and on your body to have that consistent level of carbs at your meals. And then obviously your doctor will help you with this. And then GLP-1s, a lot of people are on GLP-1s. And what they do is they work in a couple different ways. One of the things they do is they will kind of suppress those appetite and hunger hormones signaling. So where you might have before been, hungry all the time, experiencing that hyperphagia, they can help reduce those thoughts and those feelings of hunger. Um, and another thing they do is they kind of increase that feeling of fullness faster. So some people experience side effects on GLP-1s like nausea, sometimes vomiting even, and just not being as hungry as before. So it takes some time to adjust to those medications. If you have to adjust the amount of food you're eating to now match your appetite levels. Um, they also, I just think this is interesting, tell your pancreas to produce more insulin. Um, so, in order to manage some of these side effects, it's important to kind of eat smaller meals, but more frequent meals and snacks. So, before you might have been having 3 meals a day. Maybe on a GLP-1, it might be more reasonable to have 4 to 6 smaller meals a day. And that will help you feel less nauseous. And meals low in fat as well. Fat can really make us feel full. So again, we're talking about low carb, low fat diets. It's really important to maintain that on a GLP-1 because you want to be able to get enough calories in your diet that are not coming from fat. And if you get too full too quickly with those fatty foods, then that'll be harder to do. Um, Sometimes, depending on your symptoms, if you are experiencing constipation or diarrhea, fiber might need to be adjusted. But getting a good balance of soluble and insoluble fiber can also help with that. Fiber also makes us feel full. So again, that's why spacing your meals out throughout the day can be important. So cooking, your vegetables and protein until they're soft and tender, that's going to be easier on your digestion. Softer proteins, again, your body doesn't have to work as hard to digest those in your stomach since they're already pretty soft. They'll be absorbed more quickly. And then avoiding high fat foods like high fat meat, fried foods, and avoiding large meals, especially before laying down and going to bed. Because if you're laying down after a big meal, it might be really uncomfortable. Something to keep in mind is that GLP-1s can increase the risk of dehydration and low sodium. So making sure you're staying hydrated and getting enough fluid intake throughout the day is really important as well. Okay, and then just to briefly touch on metroleptin, leptin is the hormone in our um, brain that makes us feel full. So it can also help with those feelings of feeling full. Okay, so moving on to triglycerides. What is a triglyceride? I mentioned briefly before, but a triglyceride is a type of fat that we store in our body that can be used as fuel. And it is made out of this sugar glycerol backbone. This can be broken down into sugars and used that way. And then 3 fatty acid tails. That's why it's called a triglyceride. And this is a really genius way our body has to package fats because they really pack together well. So they can come from our food. We can make them out of fat and sugar, and in a normal situation, store them as fat. Again, for people with lipodystrophy, this doesn't exactly happen this way. triglycerides are unable to be stored properly, and the fat can build up in our blood, leading to high triglyceride levels. This is also called hypertriglyceridemia. Unfortunately, this fat can also sometimes build up on our organs like our liver, our pancreas, our heart, and lead to other diseases like pancreatitis, heart disease, things like that. Again, high levels of fat in our blood and on our organs can cause insulin resistance, which makes it difficult for the insulin to reach the cells to let glucose into the cells. So it's kind of like a vicious cycle. This can also lead to metabolic dysfunction associated fatty liver disease, which also makes it hard for us to absorb nutrients from our food, since our liver is really where all our nutrients are going and then getting distributed out to our tissues. And I mentioned pancreatitis. So this is severe inflammation of the pancreas. It's very painful, and it can lead to destruction of pancreatic cells and lead to further insulin issues, issues distributing insulin to the body. And we'll talk about a pancreatitis diet in a little bit. Um, so we already talked a little bit about how triglycerides come from our food and what types of foods can lead to high triglycerides. And that's really going to be our refined processed carbs like white flour, white sugar, pastries, white rice, pasta made with white flour. And again, carbs are going to affect everyone with lipodystrophy differently. So different carbs affect people differently. So it's important to monitor after your meals, your blood sugar, if you have a way to do that, if you have a Dexcom or sensor or anything like that. Try checking your blood sugar after your meals, especially after eating carbs, and see how those carbs affected you. See how the difference was if you included fiber and protein with your carbs on your blood sugar. That is going to help you in the future tailor your meals and your plates so that you don't spike your blood sugar so much. And it's also important that we don't do anything drastic or extreme. There's a lot of different talks today about ketogenic diet and all these different diets. But it's really important that you talk to your provider or a nutrition specialist, like a dietitian, to really work together for your own personal health goals, because not every diet is going to work for everyone. So, alcohol can also increase triglycerides. Alcohol is a source of calories and can affect our liver function. It can stop our liver from breaking down triglycerides, can lead to fatty liver disease if we have too much over time, as well as low physical activity, because physical activity is going to help us break down those triglycerides and use them as fuel. So, it's really important to stay active as well. Okay, if your triglycerides are over 1,000, what should we do? So this is known as severe hypertriglyceridemia, and this increases the risk of metabolic disease, especially pancreatitis risk. And for people who have severe high triglycerides, it's important that they follow a very low fat diet, which is less than 20 grams of fat per day. And again, this should be done under the supervision of a doctor and a registered dietitian. And we'll talk about the three-phase approach here that we can do. Again, I'll just mention this briefly because it's really important to do this with the guidance of a trained registered dietitian. But this is the three-phase approach to lowering severely high triglycerides. Phase one is going to be restriction of fat to 20 grams per day for weeks 1 and 2. We're also going to avoid added sugars, refined carbohydrates, and fruits because we really want to lower that fat and sugar intake. So after 2 weeks, recheck the triglycerides. If they're under 500 milligrams, you can start adding back in some healthy fat and fruit. But if they're still over 500, we're going to go back and repeat the restriction phase to 20 grams of fat per day and very low refined carbs and fruit. And then you repeat. So recheck the triglycerides. If they're under 500, keep adding back in a little bit of healthy fats with the guidance of your RD. And then phase three is the maintenance phase. And you're going to essentially maintain the diet in phase two, making sure and monitoring that your triglycerides are always staying under 500. So this is just an example of the My Plate method, which we'll talk about, but it's a beautiful plate of food. Looks very appetizing. So we can talk about My Plate a little bit. If you guys have heard of My Plate, it's a way to build your plate when you're eating a meal so that you can get the most out of it, the most nutrition out of it. So it's essentially about 50% non-starchy vegetables. So that's going to be like our salads, our greens, our broccoli, about a quarter of a low-fat protein, and about a quarter of a starch or fruit. So another important thing is if we're keeping, especially with the severe hypertriglyceride diet, under 20 grams of fat per day, it's going to be about 600 grams of fat per meal. So again, we're talking about low fat, low carb diets. What are low fat protein examples? So that's going to be your skinless poultry, like chicken or turkey breast, white fish, cod, flounder, halibut, tilapia, again, without the skin. Canned tuna in water, very important, not in oil, in water. Legumes like lentils, beans, chickpeas, garbanzo beans, edamame as well. If you've ever had young soybeans, that's what tofu is made of. Tofu is another low-fat protein option. Low-fat dairy like cottage cheese and non-fat Greek yogurt. Those are both low-fat dairy options that are very high in protein. And when you're cooking, um, you want to use minimal oil because, again, that oil is a fat. Um, and we can talk a little bit about different kinds of oils. Some people like to use olive oil. Some people, if they are cooking in really high heat, don't like to use olive oil as much because the flavor changes, and the smoke point of olive oil is pretty low. So it's better for kind of a quick saute on a low heat or finishing over a salad, something like that, than actually really, really like cooking something on high heat. If you do want to cook something on really high heat, avocado oil is has a high smoke point, but again, just keep in mind to keep it in moderation and use it a small amount. And it's important again that we avoid those high fat foods, sweets, sugar sweetened beverages, and alcohol especially. I know the holidays are coming up, so that's really exciting, and we do want people to have fun and enjoy with their loved ones. And we can talk a little bit later about some tips for enjoying the holidays and still feeling good. So if you've ever heard of MCT oil, this stands for medium chain triglyceride oil. A lot of people use medium chain triglyceride oils because they directly enter our cells instead of going through the typical route that we digest fats. So they are easily digested. Um, However, we don't quite have evidence about how it affects many different people and many different conditions. So we don't yet have evidence of how it might affect lipodystrophy. But if you are interested, you can ask your dietitian, your provider about it. And it's important to use a pharmaceutical grade MCT oil if you are going to use one. Okay. All right. So we talked a little bit about the plate method, and we can just go back in with some examples and details. But we're really using this strategy to help us plan meals that are high in fiber, high in good protein, high in nutrients from all those good foods that we want to include. So again, it's about 50% of those non-starchy vegetables, which can be like salads, greens, green beans, carrots, broccoli, cauliflower, basically your favorite like garden veggies. And then a quarter of low-fat proteins, which again is going to be that lean chicken, turkey, skinless white fish and seafood, like shrimp, or plant proteins. I'm a big fan of plant proteins like beans, lentils, and soy, because not only are they high in protein, but they're also high in fiber, which is super important for us to get enough of. And then a quarter of those starchy uh, or fruits, if you're going to eat a fruit, make sure you eat a whole fruit because it's got some of that fiber in there. But you can include things like yogurt or milk as this portion as well. Low fat, of course, and whole grains like quinoa, for example, or a plant pasta, like a plant protein pasta, like a chickpea pasta, something like that. So, quarter of the plate would be that. Here's some more tips. Again, carbohydrates with more fiber and protein, that's going to help slow down the effect of our blood glucose. Keeping skin on our vegetables and fruit like sweet potatoes or berries, whenever possible, or like apples, is also going to include some fiber in there. So fruits that you can include would be like berries, citrus, apples, pears, stone fruits like nectarines, peaches, and plums. They have a lower effect on blood glucose. And we talk a little bit about the glycemic index. And what this is just a scale of how much a food raises our blood sugar. And it's a scale from 0 to 100. If you're ever curious about that, you can look up, what fruits or what foods on the glycemic index are going to spike your blood sugar more or less to make those choices easier. So, for example, an apple is about a 55, so it's kind of right in the middle of the GI scale. 70 or higher is going to be a high glycemic index. So, those are things like our refined pasta, white bread, things like that. Interestingly, refrigerating starches like rice or potatoes is going to lower uh, their impact on our blood sugar by something called resistant starch. So the more times actually that you refrigerate and heat up those starches, it creates more resistant starch. And this just means that it takes longer for our body to digest those long starch chains. We talked about this. We talked about the order, so eating our protein and vegetables before carbs is also going to kind of slow down, because we already have something in our stomach, that's going to slow down our blood sugar spike. Really important to limit red meat and processed meats. These typically contain more fat and more sodium, especially they contain saturated fat, which is not as good for us as unsaturated fat, which is what plant oils have. Limiting full fat cheese, again, let's choose low fat or fat-free dairy options. Limiting sweets, avoiding deep fried foods. I'm sure maybe some of you have had an experience where you've eaten a deep fried food and you've just not felt very good after. So, keep that in mind. Like, how do I want to feel after I eat this? And then avoiding um, low fiber, white breads, white pastas, drinks with sugar in them.
Um, can you maybe say something about the sugary drinks? Because we have like the drinks with like which are not diet or sugar free, and then we have the sugar free drinks. So is it okay to drink like the sugar free drinks? And what kind of like sugar makes it sweet?
Yeah, definitely. Good question. So yeah, we have obviously our sodas and pops that are not just regular, sweetened with sugar, and those that are sugar-free. So they're going to have some sort of uh, non-nutritive sweetener, we call them sometimes, but some sort of sweetener that's not sugar. Um, I would suggest kind of staying away from both kinds. If you are going to have a drink like you want something bubbly or something like that, I would definitely suggest the sugar-free over the regular drink. But especially if it has bubbles in it or carbonation, especially if you're on something like a GLP-1, even though it doesn't have sugar, which is already a step in the right direction, that's definitely that empty, refined sugar, which is just going to add calories but no nutrition. Especially if it has bubbles, I was kind of mentioning, that's also going to fill your stomach up and leave less room for nutritious foods. Um, the reason that I would also consider staying away from beverages that are not carbonated and not sugar sweetened is because we still don't fully understand the effects, and we're still studying the effects that those sweeteners might have on our body. Um, Again, it's important to enjoy life, and it's really hard to stop drinking those things if they're a part of your daily routine. Um, but uh, we're just getting a little bit of evidence here and there that it's possible that those sweeteners might affect our response to glucose and our insulin response, and they might still uh, be on the glycemic index scale, So again, we still don't have full evidence on this, but I would say until we do, I would try to stay away from those, try to include more nutritious foods or drinks that, a sparkling water with like no flavor or just like a LaCroix, I would even, I don't know if they have those in Israel, but maybe. But, it's just a sparkling water with you know, with no sugar and no sweetener to it. It's got a little bit of a scent of like fruit, but, so things like that, or you can continue to drink those things, but really try to minimize, maybe like once or twice a day versus three or four for example, because again, I know those things are designed to keep us drinking them often because they taste really good. Um, but yeah, I would say reduce those and then eventually, maybe switch to like a sparkling water, something like that.
Perfect. Thanks.
Awesome. Okay, couple more examples about high quality carbs that contain fiber and protein. Um, Things like beans. So many great ways to prepare beans and make them delicious. Lentils as well. So many great recipes out there. Um, Pasta, again, made from plant proteins like chickpeas or beans or lentils is a good option, as well as these whole grains like quinoa. If you do want to have rice, I would go with brown rice. It's got more fiber and protein. Farro, um, and then those low-fat dairy options have protein as well. Whole grain pasta and breads are a better option than refined for sure. If you want a starchy vegetable, a sweet potato with the skin, which has that fiber, is also great. Squashes like acorn squash and spaghetti squash, again, including the skin of any of these veggies or fruits that can be eaten is always a good idea. Berries like blueberries, raspberries, blackberries are not going to spike our blood sugar too high. And then fruits like oranges, apples, pears, stone fruits as well. Um, in moderation, we could have roasted regular potatoes with the skin. The reason we might want to avoid mashed potatoes is because of that. It's almost like a pre-digestion we're doing when we're mashing the potatoes. So they're going to be absorbed really quickly. Those carbs are going to be absorbed really quickly. But whole potatoes with the skin going to be absorbed a little bit slower. Fruits like grapes and melons are pretty high in sugar. Um, if you do want to eat grapes, keep the skin on, maybe only eat a handful and space it out throughout the day and eat it with something. with another, snack that has protein in it or fiber. So we talked about this a little already, but it's really important to remember that different carbs are going to affect people differently, depending on their level of insulin resistance, their condition, their lifestyle factors, a lot of different things. So um, it's important again to kind of monitor your glucose after you have those meals and those carbs and keep a food log, like write down, your blood glucose and what meal you just had so that you can keep track and really understand what different carbs and how those combinations of different foods is affecting you specifically.
What times after a meal should you check your blood glucose?
Yeah. So about 1 to 2 hours after your meal is when your blood sugar is going to be at the highest peak. So that's probably the best time to check that blood sugar. All right. So plant proteins, I'm going to profess my love for plant proteins again here, because they not only have protein, but they also have fiber. They also contain typically other nutrients, vitamins, and minerals that we need. They are gentler on our kidneys as well, compared to animal meat. So things like, again, black beans, pinto beans, kidney beans, all types of beans, peas, lentils. Again, keep in mind that peas are starchy, as well as lentils. These are legumes in general are starchy. So we're going to want to put it in that quarter of our plate that has the starchy foods. Um, and then soy foods like tofu, edamame, tempeh, really good for us. A while back, people were a bit nervous about soy foods because they heard that they have estrogens. This is not true. They do contain a compound called phytoestrogen, but this is actually a compound that's good for us. And if we have kind of excess estrogen in our body, it can actually block that um, estrogen from doing wacky stuff in our body that we don't want it to do. So it's actually kind of the opposite of what people think. Soy food is really good for us. There's no reason to be scared of it. And then seitan, if you've ever heard of it, is also called vital wheat gluten. Obviously, if you have a gluten sensitivity or celiac, stay away from this. But if you have no problems with gluten, this is just the protein. The gluten is the protein of the wheat. Um, and that is another plant protein option that is out there. Other lean proteins are going to be seafood, light colored fish, tuna in water, skinless chicken or turkey, lean turkey, lean ground or lean, sorry, ground turkey or chicken, egg whites. Some people don't have a problem with the egg yolks. The egg yolks do contain some cholesterol. For healthy people, it's not a problem to eat the egg yolks. But again, it depends on your reaction to them, and how they affect your lab values. So if you are more comfortable eating just the egg whites, those are very high in protein. But the egg yolks will also contain some important vitamins, vitamin A, vitamin E. Um, Low fat dairy, again, like cottage cheese and yogurt. And then if you are going to have red meat, lean cuts of meat, of red meat are beef or pork, sirloin or tenderloin. Those are going to be the least fatty cuts. And then ground beef with less than 10% fat. Game meats like venison, bison, those are also lean. And then again, use fat sparingly. If you have severely high triglycerides or pancreatitis, you might need to follow that very low fat diet. So cooking oils might need to be avoided or just, very, very minimal. And then some people with lipodystrophy can include a small or even a moderate amount of fat. Again, everyone's a bit different. So there are healthy fats in foods like salmon, other oily small fish like mackerel, sardines, nuts and seeds, and cooking oils like olive oil and avocado oil. Again, it is important to get some of those healthy fats, especially those omega-3s, which come from fatty fish. But we are going to want to keep those minimal and just get what we need. And a dietitian or nutritionist can help you with that. And I think we're at the end of the guides.
Perfect. Maybe we can talk about how can we take these guidelines and make like a menu for a lipodystrophy patient. So, what is a breakfast for a lipodystrophy patient look like, or a lunch or a dinner?
Absolutely, yeah. So, you know, when it comes to meal planning, that my plate is going to be really helpful. And then foods for breakfast. I'm a big fan of eggs, so I would say those egg whites. A lot of people make egg bites and add in veggies to that. Some people add spinach, onions, tomatoes, mushrooms, whatever you like, really. You can make those egg bites. If you want to include more protein, some people add cottage cheese to it, blend it together and it gives it, me and Sharon were talking about this, it gives it kind of a bready texture. Um, or you can make it into a pancake even, mixing those egg whites and that cottage cheese. And then you can kind of put whatever you want in that pancake or crepe. Um, and then, yeah, I think yogurt, low-fat yogurt is going to be a good breakfast option as well. Also, importantly, they contain probiotics, which are really good for us, little gut bacteria that we can, improve our gut bacteria health is going to probably improve our health overall. If you like a breakfast burrito, for example, with that egg cottage cheese crepe, or even a whole grain, very, very low carb wrap with some beans in it, some veggies, and some low-fat dairy as well. I would avoid juice in the morning, or um, I would really limit juice in general because it's high in sugar. Even though it is fruit juice, it's still pretty high in sugar. There's no fiber with it to slow down that blood sugar spike. It's really going to be absorbed quickly. So if you do want to have, some sort of juice, I would suggest a whole fruit instead, like an apple or something like that, with, another protein and fiber. And then for lunch, kind of same process. Maybe half of that plate could be a nice, beautiful salad with like kale or spinach, whatever your green of choice is. And I love to put lemon juice on my salads. If you can have a little bit of that fat um, as a dressing, go for it. Or if you're using MCT oil, you can use that as a dressing and kind of add spices. Add your garlic if you can tolerate it, um, some red pepper, whatever spices you like are going to really add a lot of flavor to that salad. You can dress up your salad however you like and add veggies, red onions, chickpeas, beans to it, whatever you like. And that's going to be maybe half your plate. And then quarter of that plate could be a lean protein, maybe some chicken breast, or some ground turkey. And then the other quarter of that plate could be, like a quinoa, maybe with some of that dressing or some other veggies and those spices, lemon juice. I'm a big fan. So that's an idea for kind of like lunch or dinner. Um, yeah. What about Sharon? Do you have meals that you like to put together?
Yeah, so I people who really like rice, I would substitute with cauliflower rice. I think it's very nice, and you can actually buy it like ready to put in a plate, basically heat it up and put it in a plate. And you can put some dressing or sauce on it, and it's really good if you really need the rice in your life. I really like it. And yeah, for me, just a big salad with lots of veggies, anything you like, lots of green and lots of colors in it, and like a chicken breast with a tahini sauce. For me, it's like the best breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I really like it. And yeah, fruits that will not spike your glucose level. So berries, I think you can add to each meal if you really want the fruit in your life. That's just the best. And another question is now around the holidays. What are some strategies to maintain your labs okay and not have too much of food in general?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that advice all still stands of kind of those smaller, frequent meals. It's a bit tougher during the holidays because everyone's typically gathering around a meal or two meals. But if you are struggling with that, eating a little bit less during the day, before that meal, or making sure you're eating really these, recommended high fiber, high protein foods before that meal so that you can enjoy it a little bit more and still feel good after. And, maybe after the meal, going for a nice walk with your loved ones is a great way to start kickstarting that absorption of all the delicious food you just ate. Um, even a slow walk could still be beneficial to start helping the insulin kind of unlock in your muscles those cells and let the glucose into your leg muscles and you know or if you really want to take it a step further and do just a quick little easy cardio workout after the meal. You do you. I'm not going to do any workouts during the holiday, but if you want to, if you're worried about it, go for it. Maybe bring a cousin, bring a loved one and do it together. Um, but yeah, remember to enjoy, and oftentimes during the holidays, there's alcohol involved, and we're with our loved ones and everything. Um, I would say just to remember the effect that alcohol might have on, your body and your organs, especially with lipodystrophy. It's unfortunate to have to watch it more closely, but it is going to help you in the long run feel better if you kind of reduce or limit the alcohol consumption as well and the fried foods.
Yeah, sounds great. Thank you so much. If you have any questions, please email them to us and we can ask Annabella and our other dietitians to give you some answers. If you have any recipes that are low carb, low fat, and appropriate for lipodystrophy, please send them to us as well. We're going to make like a recipe book if we have enough recipes. And yeah, thank you so much. That was so great. You can download the guidelines in our website. So go to lipodystrophyunited.org, Patient Corner Nutrition. You can find it there. Happy holidays and see you soon. Thanks.